likes airports? Just raise your hand. Do you like airports? I actually like airports. Yeah. Eric likes airports. Now I know how this goes. There's some folks in here who travel for their work, and to be at the airport means that they're neither where they're supposed to be nor where they're going, and they associate the airport with waiting. Now I don't travel enough to hate the airport. To me, it's kind of exciting, right? Because I'm going to go somewhere. I associate it with anticipation to go somewhere new. Generally speaking, wherever I'm going, I want to be going. It feels good. You know what I mean? I've left my house. I have no work to do there. I've left my office. I really can't do much there. And so who knows? I could read a book. I can listen to it. I might meet somebody. All sorts of new things can happen when I get on that plane. So I generally associate with good things. I'm that security line, whatever. I'm not that bothered by the security line. It'll be okay. How about you? So we have one person likes it. Anybody's like half, like, it's all right. All right. Yeah. Now, I actually, how do you feel about our airport, the Philadelphia airport? I remember when it was like 2 wings, 2 terminals, and they're adding a third. I'm actually proud of our airport. We got like 6 terminals. And I've seen worse airports. And yes, I know the newer cities, they have newer airports and they're more lovely or whatever, but this is our airport. My favorite part of the Philadelphia airport is in the international terminal. And some of you have seen this. It's when you're walking this very, very long walk, it's a long path of movie posters. Have you seen the movie posters, right? And back in the 80s, I guess they decided to set some money aside so that they could have movies in Philadelphia. And a whole bunch of movies from like the mid-80s to the like mid-2000s or whatever, where there's a bunch of movies around here. And there, a lot of them were bad, like Mannequin, but there's some Rockies and some Sixth Sense. There's some good stuff there. But it was like all these movie posters. And I love movie posters. I kind of collect them. Right? I like being there. There's some kind of energy for me in the airport. And I know. It's me and like 1.5 people that like airports. All right. Now, imagine, though, getting to the airport and seeing that none of the planes are moving. And they've actually kind of shut down the whole security thing. And they said, you know what? We have invested so much in our restaurants and in our stores and our movie posters that we actually think that this is just a pretty cool place to hang. And so we're done with this like air travel. We're just going to be a place for people to come to. And like just be, because like we've got small restaurants. We've got convenience stores. And we've got movie posters. Doesn't everybody want to come and just like be there? That would be weird, right? Yeah, that would be kind of weird. Like you're an airport. We're supposed to go somewhere when we get here. That's a metaphor I want us to grab onto when it comes to church. Being a part of a church is not a destination. It's not something you go to. It's a place that's supposed to take you somewhere. Church isn't a place that you arrive and you assess it for what it is. It should take you somewhere. Why? Because when you're with the people of God, you're with God, and God is inherently taking us somewhere. And whenever church gets mixed up and we lose that sense as to going somewhere, we actually lose church for what it is, and I actually think we entirely miss out on God for who He is. And once we miss out God for who He is, our life begins to get very, very frustrating because we begin expecting things of Him that He has not promised us. But when we can understand who we are supposed to be, we can understand who God is supposed to be, we understand what the context of our life ought to be like, and then all of a sudden, instead of that place being this burdensome thing, you realize that it's a place that takes us somewhere. And all of a sudden, it becomes entirely a different experience. All right, so we're in a series called You Had One Job, where we are speaking specifically about, okay, what does it mean for us to be a church? What does it mean for us to be the people of God? And so we are looking through the the last words of Jesus in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We got a special thing going on next week, and then we're going to look at his last words in the book of Acts, where Jesus gets very, very clear about what's most important with his last words. And so we're going to read from the Gospel of John right now. And just like in every other time where we've studied this, the context of these last words is that Jesus surprisingly died. Nobody expected it, and everybody was absolutely tragically disappointed and entirely surprised, frustrated, and they didn't know what to do about it, right? So he dies, and then all of a sudden he rises from the dead, and they're entirely surprised by it and actually scared to death. I mean, imagine meeting a dead person, all right? So what happens is in these events, people start seeing a dead person alive. They're freaked out. Jesus always has to say, peace be with you. Why? Because they're really, really scared. But in every single one of these Gospels, he comes back to the one job they were given. And each of the Gospel writers clarifies it in a unique way. So we're going to look at the Gospel of John and see how it's described there. So we're reading in John chapter 20. Jesus had appeared to a few folks, but this is one of his last experiences with the disciples. On the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together with the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them. Remember, they would have been terrified. He's a dead person that's alive, and he just appears among them. He didn't walk through the door. He just, boom. Anyway, terrified, right? So he says, peace be with you. After he said this, he showed him his hands and his side. The disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. Again, Jesus said, peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you. All right. We're going to reflect on this one simple sentence. As the Father has sent me, so I am sending you. What does that mean to be sent? What does it mean that Jesus is sent? It means that we're supposed to basically extend his mission in the way that he did his mission. Simple definition of what it means to be sent: to continue his mission in the way he did his mission. We are sent as Jesus is sent, which means he's got a job that's not done, and so we need to continue to do it in the way that he did it. So we're going to break this passage down in 3 questions. All right. So we're supposed to do Jesus' work, right? To bring redemption to the world, the renewal of all things. All right. How are we doing? Let's. I've got 3 charts that talks about how we're doing, particularly in America. We're killing it across the world. The Christian faith is growing rapidly across the world. How are we doing in America? I got one. Here's one slide here. This is a slide about Americans and their positive opinion. All right. If you look at the far left, you probably can't see it on the screen. It's Americans and their opinion on Jesus. The blue column is people's total opinion. That means 71% of Americans have a positive opinion of Jesus. 84% of Christians have a positive opinion of Jesus. I'm not too sure exactly. So you would take this all with a grain of salt, right? So 84% of Christians have a positive experience of Jesus Christ. All right. People of other faith, well over 50% have a positive opinion of Jesus. And people with no faith, 40%. All right. The next question is spirituality. Yeah, people kind of like spirituality. Even the people with no faith, they like spirituality more than they like Jesus. I get that, right? That makes sense, right? The third column is what do people think about the Bible? And people actually think pretty good things about the Bible. Over 60% of people, on average, think the Bible, have a positive experience of the Bible, and almost 80% of Christians have a good experience of the Bible. They have positive thoughts. I mean, I'd love to hear the people who don't have a positive, but hey, we can talk about that another time. But even those of other faiths, more than half of them think the Bible's good, and people no faith, why would you expect them to have a good thought of the Bible? Anyway, so, all right. And the fourth column, I forget what that was because our logo is on top of that one. All right, go to the next slide. All right, so, you know what, go back to that. That's actually Christians. What do they think of, I'm sorry, that's what they think of churches in their community. Christianity, thank you. All right, that's what they think. Go back to that, go back to the first slide. People kind of think Christianity isn't that bad. You know, over 70% of Christians think Christianity is not that bad. All right. So, so almost 60%. But let's keep going. All right. Churches in their community. The next slide. All right. The columns start dropping. Almost 60% of the Christians like the churches in their community. Less than 50% of people like the churches. So if you talk to the average, 50%, if you talk to 10 people in Westchester, 5 of them will say, we really don't have a positive opinion of the churches in our community. And if they don't have faith, not even it'll be less than 1 in 4. They won't have a positive opinion of the churches in our community. I'll keep going. You see Christians, Christian pastors or priests, and about 44 out of 10 will think I'm all right. You know, almost 60% of Christians will like pastors. People of other faith, about a third of them will respect pastors and priests. And people of no faith, under 20% will respect pastors and priests. All right, keep going. Evangelicals. All right. If you don't have faith, 9% of people like you. If you identify yourself as an evangelical, that means 9 in 10 people have a negative view of you. We don't even like ourselves. 31% of Christians approve of evangelicals. And the total is well less than 30%. About 3 in 4 people don't have a positive view of people who would call themselves an evangelical. Famous Christians or famous pastors is about the same. Keep going to the next slide. And so you have celebrity Christians on the left isn't scoring very good. Celebrity pastors, oh my goodness, that's not going well at all. Not even 1 in 5 Christians like celebrity pastors. And mega churches, interesting. People of other faith actually like mega churches better than we do. But let's look at I put Jesus back in the right-hand column. Jesus is killing it. Christians, not so much. What's going on there? I got this from a Barna study, and the Barna study said this. Overwhelmingly, Americans view Jesus in a positive light and as a model for how to treat people and live a good life. Unfortunately, the data also shows how the church fails to embody the traits of Jesus, especially in the eyes of those of no faith. Perceptions of present-day Christianity do not align with how people view its founder. That's a really gentle way of saying you suck, right? And we need to take that. We need to hear that. To go off and say, oh, that's what they do, that's what we can't do that. Every single person is responsible for their perception. If you're an adult, one of the things you do to every 19-year-old, right, is that you say, okay, go look at your social media feed, right? When you're applying for a job at age 28, every single photo you put on your social media feed will shape the perception that people have of you the rest of your life. We tell young people that the perception that people have of them is entirely their responsibility. So Christians, we have to recognize that particularly if you call yourself an evangelical, 9 in 10 people don't like you. Own it. You have earned that. Most people have a negative view. Take responsibility for that. When we were trying to come up with our name as a church, I kind of recognized this, and I just didn't want to have a name that sounded churchy. I didn't want to talk about the church when it came to our name, when we came up with a different name. Why? We want to give people hope that church can be different than the one they've given up on. I wanted a name that's going to force us to talk about who Jesus is. And if you don't know, the name 938 comes from a passage in the Gospel of Matthew. where Jesus envisions the church to be an extension of his love and grace. If somebody asks you why it's called 938, it's because it's a story about Jesus. It's about Jesus helping people, making this world better, and calling the church to be an extension of his love and grace. But I think it does bear a little bit of reflection. Why do people like Jesus and not the church? Why do people like Jesus and not Christians sometimes? I think a lot of it oftentimes is people don't know Christians. I think a lot of it's because Christians don't make themselves known. But if you go back to our passage, you see Jesus entirely on you look at the story of Jesus' life, he's always on a mission. He's always moving towards people. He embraced sacrifice. He embraced suffering for his mission. Jesus was not trying to succeed. He's not trying to get something for himself. He was always trying to give something to others. As I reflect and I move through those charts, it feels to me that when the scores go down, it's a much more about come to us. Come see our celebrity pastors. Come see our awesome worship bands. Come see our stuff. How about you come check out our stuff? Where Jesus is always moving towards people. Whenever there's this establishment, come to us. Come enjoy our entitlements. Come enjoy our little Christian culture that we've created over here. People don't get with that. When I see Jesus on his mission, I see his vulnerability. I think when people look at Jesus, they recognize the vulnerability of his mission all the way to the cross. People respond to vulnerability. People tend to mirror vulnerability. They tend to move back towards people when they're vulnerable. When I read these things, and just to know a little bit about me, it wrecks me. It's probably the thing that I struggle with, and there's probably few things that disappoint me more than the separation between Christians and the world. Why? Because when I met Christ, everything got better in my life. Everything got better in my life. I just want everybody to experience that. Everything got better. When I hear Christians complain about the culture, people that disagree with, I just wonder, what about the good news don't you get? Would a cancer surgeon complain about their patients? He'd say, get rid of your cancer and then you can come see me? Would a financial advisor start avoiding their clients because all their finances are in disarray? You get your financial thing together, then come to me. Would a teacher demand people to pass the final before they teach them? Why would church people complain about people they disagree with? But that's what they hear. That's what they hear. And every time we click on one of those things, we give more money to people who continue to divide us from the people we have been sent to. What about the good news? Do we not understand if we're going to avoid, complain, or carry resentment towards people who disagree with us? Why? It wrecks me. And we see in Jesus something very different. I think what might help us here is to recognize the changing nature of our world. Jesus was sent to it. He moved towards people. He moved towards people where they are. Leslie Newbegin was a writer and a missionary in the Far East and in Central Asia. And when he came back in the mid-70s, he's the first person to say it. The West is the new mission field. The West is far from God in ways they don't even realize. And see, what he recognized is something that had been baking for 2 centuries from Immanuel Kant on. It was the emergence of pluralism and postmodernity. And with the emergence of pluralism, something changed that the people in the West were going to experience, and that was going to shock them because it would not have been like this for 1,700 years. It was going to be the end of Christendom. He saw it in the mid-70s that the end of Christendom was coming. Christendom began with Constantine when the Roman Empire said, all right, this Roman Empire is Christian. That means everybody better get on board. And all of a sudden, what changed about the Christian faith, this has never been true of the Christian faith for 100, 200, 300 years. To be a Christian was to suffer sacrifice and persecution and difficulty. Once Constantine becomes a Christian, for the next 1,700 years, to be a Christian is to enjoy cultural benefits. Is to be an insider, to be part of the club, is to have good things go your way. And Leslie Newbigin saw that the moment was coming right. The end of Christendom was here, and it's going to be a new day of pluralism in the West. He says this, as we recognize that brought all sorts of difficulties. He said this, it seems to me to be of great importance to insist that our mission is not, first of all, an action of ours, but it is an action of God. What he recognized is that for the church to be what the church ought to be, it's going to have to function in a mission setting. In Christendom, church was a place that everybody just chose their church. Outside of Christendom, you don't assume that someone goes to a church. The church has to move towards them. And if we're going to understand it for what it is, we're going to understand fundamentally church is, well, it's following God to where he is. Now, I got a little bit off my outline, so bear with me as I get back to where we're talking about. As I talked about what wrecked me, I was reminded of my seminary professor who described two kinds of librarians. There's the librarian who is there, and you know these librarians, and their job, as they recognize it, is to protect the books from the people, right? They're angry, they're upset with you, and they're like, well, you want a book? Well, we'll give it to you, but I need it back in about 10 minutes, all right? But then there's the other librarian that's there to get the books to the people. It's two very different postures as to what people are doing. And the mission of God is to move towards the people, to get the books towards the people. And in a pluralistic postmodern world, churches that are protecting the books from the people are on a half-life. If it's about protecting what we have, those churches will protect what they have and they will begin aging out because they will never get those books to the next generation coming up or the next generation coming in. Sociologists suggest about 50% are going that way over the next 20 years. Doesn't mean that other churches won't move into those buildings, but it does mean that once you've become the librarian that protects people from the books, you're on your half-life. In our passage, it says, as the Father has sent me, so I send you. It's important to understand what Jesus didn't say. He didn't say, as the Father has established me, so I establish you. It doesn't say, as the Father has blessed me, I bless you. As the Father protected me, now I'm going to protect you. As the Father's honored me, now I'm going to honor you. As the Father's authorized me, so I authorize you. It says, the Father has sent me, so I send you. So now the question is, what does it mean to be sent? All right. I brought up the pluralistic culture, right? Jesus, though, was sent to a moral, religious culture. Everybody was religious and everybody had some sort of religious identity. And that culture was divided from a very pluralistic secular culture. Does that feel a little similar? But even though in the beginning of the gospel it says the light, describing the way he was sent, that the light was sent into the world, but the darkness did not understand it. Most of what you see in the Gospel of John is religious people not getting Jesus because they're just darkened. They got their religion, they got their thing as far as what they think the faith is, and because Jesus is calling them to something different, they entirely miss out on everything that Jesus came to give them. Why? Because they think they got it already. And the gospel moves quickly beyond the religious people to the rest of the Roman world. I described Leslie Newbegin talking about pluralism. It's been baked in our culture for a couple hundred years, and this feels really threatening to the people on the right, because people on the right, very conservative and particularly religious people, feel like they're losing a lot of their entitlements that they've had in the culture for years. Pluralism is supposed to, though, offer a marketplace of ideas, but not many people are showing up to that. And rather conversing, everyone just keeps grabbing for authority. To the people on the left who want to sort of rid the world of Christendom and all of its effects, I say to that person, you're using the values that Christianity gave you, like justice and mercy and kindness. All of those things that Christianity gave you, you're trying to use those things to wipe Christianity away, but you've already gotten rid of Christianity. Once you wipe those things out, you lose the very values that caused you to drive Christianity out. What happens when the golden goose, they gave you things like justice and mercy and kindness, is gone? We're just left with a power grab. Who can get the most power to wipe the other person out? And those on the right, I say that I say to the people on the right, when's the last time political policy has ever changed a heart? When's the last time political policy has ever changed anybody's worldview? And yet people are going to choose their sides, and Jesus is like, what are you thinking? He says, he has sent us to them. They're not our enemies. There is no them out there. Newbegin's insight forces us to look and accept the world for what it is. Light shines into the darkness, and darkness does not understand it. And forces us to think about what the church ought to be. Sociologist George Hunberger assessed 3 ways most people think about the church. This is the way a lot of people think about the church. The first way people think about the church is this way: that it's a place. It's a place where things happen, right? There's my church. My church is over there. It's that building, and in that building is where I got baptized, where I got married, and when I die, they're going to put me in the ground right outside of that church. It's a place where things happen. Unfortunately, we don't have one of those as a church, so we're not as tempted to fall into the idea that a church is a place. Other people, the dominant, I would say this is a much stronger view of church, is that it's a vendor of religious goods and services. In a consumeristic culture, you assess the church based upon how it's going to serve your needs and what kind of deal you're going to get. Am I going to get the kind of people I want to be with? Am I going to get the kind of teaching I want? Or is it going to be the kind of music? Is it going to be, what is this going to offer me? And am I going to profit from this experience? And that's just normal, and we don't have to be upset about that. It's just consumeristic culture, and that's where people are going to begin when they think about a church experience. If they came to the church and they hated every single moment, or they came to the worship experience, they hated every single moment, we shouldn't expect for them to come back. Because it was awful. Why would they come back? They shouldn't come back. If it was an awful experience, they shouldn't come back. But it is a way that people view church. Another way people view church, they think of it as a group of people on mission together. And that's a helpful view. But the question we need to continue to ask is whose mission? Whose mission are they on? And it's entirely tempting in this world. People who are longing for meaning to grab onto all these kind of crazy kinds of missions. Is it the mission of the pastor? Is it the mission of a group of people? Is it some sort of mission of a denomination? Or is it just sort of somebody's, fired up approach to this, that, or the other? When you think of church as a group of people on a mission, you end up thinking that the guy in front should be the CEO, be like making all the decisions and making sure everything gets done amazingly, and there's always profit for the shareholders. That's not church. When you think that the church is just a group of people on a mission, you typically end up falling into fast food leadership. Fast food leadership is the kind of thing that forces people into like, okay, what's the fastest way to bring a coalition of people together? Come up with a common enemy. Fast food leadership always sounds like us versus them, right? If I'm going to get people to do something and I give them an enemy, that's going to get them going. Churches should have mission statements. Organizations should have mission statements. It's good wisdom. But like I said before, what Leslie Newbegin said, it seems to me of great importance to insist that our mission is not first of all an action of ours. It's an action of God. What it means to be sent is that we believe that God is already at work wherever we might go, which changes everything. Because that means the church is wherever the people of God are coming together around what God is doing. So yes, we're going to worship Him because, coming together like this matters. But when we show up to meet the needs of the world, that's where the church is also. When we show up to serve one another in small groups and listen to one another, that's where God is at work there as well. When a family comes together to address an issue, God is at work there. How would it change the way we think of things to recognize that God is already out there? We are looking for where He's at work and trying to show up there. When we recognize that church isn't an airport we go to and just sit there. No, we are getting there to find out where God is going to take us, and we go places together. How would it change your experience of life? Knowing that God is already at work at your work. God is already at work in the lives of people in your family. God is already at work in your neighborhood. God is at work in the lives of everybody around us. Now, every single person in this world is in different degrees of resistance and surrender to Him, right? But it doesn't mean that God's not working in people's lives. We don't have to come up with it. We don't have to fabricate it. We just have to draw close to Him and follow Him in it. We see it in Jesus' life. The way Jesus was sent was this: the Word became flesh and He dwelt among us. God didn't say, okay, here are the rules, here's some things, figure it out for yourselves. He showed up and reminded us of what humanity was. He went to the wedding. If you read through the Gospel of John, He went to the wedding. And when they ran out of wine, you know what He did? He went out and bought more wine. Well, no, He actually turned the water into wine. But He actually produced an enormous amount of wine, a lot of wine for that wedding. He made the wedding better. It's a simple change of paradigm in thinking that the church is this attractional place where it's supposed to attract everybody to it, or it's this incarnational way of moving towards people. When you go to and to follow Jesus in this way, when you go to a party, are you thinking, is this going to be a good deal for me? Jesus went to the party to make it better. I have some friends that anytime we have a gathering and they're coming to it, they show up a little bit early. They let us know they're showing. First of all, they RSVP early. They're not trying to hold out for a better option. They RSVP early. They show up early so that they can be a part of making the party feel good. When you go to a party, are you looking to get something out of it, or are you looking to give something to it? You saw it with Jesus with a religious leader named Nicodemus, who was really wealthy and was really popular. And so Nicodemus needed a quiet place at night to be able to process his questions, because the stakes were really high for him to follow Jesus. That's most of our friends. Most of our friends are really wealthy relative to the rest of the world, but most have enormous amount of assets and have a lot of religious baggage around them. For them to follow Jesus, it's a high stakes endeavor. They need a safe conversation with you if they're going to be able to step, and they're going to need some time. Nicodemus needed time, and spoiler alert, he shows up at the end of John. I'll let you find that out. The next chapter, chapter 2 is the wedding, chapter 3 is Nicodemus, chapter 4, Jesus finds a moral outsider. And nobody accepted this person. She needed straight answers. She needed clear next steps. She needed to be treated with dignity. And Jesus spoke directly with her. She needed to be taken seriously. There are people in your life that might feel like outsiders. Do you take them real seriously? Do you give them clear answers about who Jesus is? Do you ask them hard questions? Outsiders will talk about anything, right? When it comes to spirituality, the stakes aren't that high for them. They can step into something new. Do you take them seriously? Will you talk to them about Jesus? If we're sent into this world, that means that there are parties where God has already worked that we can go make better. If God is already at work, that means that just about everybody in one way or another is thinking about him. Are we the safe kind of people that people can have real conversations about what matters most? And if God is already at work, there are outsiders just waiting to be told about the love of God and to be included and to be cared for. And we have been sent to them. Jesus has no other plan but us. I think the hardest thing for this, and the thing that leads us to retreat and to want to have a come to me attitude and just do it our way kind of attitude, is that it's really scary to be sent. It really is scary. It's really vulnerable. Because when you're sent somewhere, there's two places you're not. You're neither here nor there. You're in between. And who knows how it's going to go. You know what vulnerability feels like when you text a friend or you invite somebody out on a date, and are they going to respond? You know you're vulnerable when you put your job application in there and you're waiting for them to get back to you. You know you're vulnerable when you invite some folks over for a gathering and you're wondering if anybody's going to respond. You can put yourself out there, but I would suggest to you, if you want to be close to Jesus, you're going to need to be vulnerable for him. You're going to need to feel that sense of vulnerability. If you're not experiencing vulnerability for Jesus, you're not going to experience much of Jesus. Why? Because you've been sent. If your entire experience of life is trying to feel established and safe and never feel vulnerability, you're not going to feel much of Jesus. Why? Because Jesus is on a mission to make this world better and to call people into a relationship with him. If you're not on that mission, you're just not going to experience him. Life will be disappointing. Your prayers will be frustrated. Why? Because you're demanding something of him that he's not intending to give you. He's not, if his whole goal is for you to have a safe life, he would have brought you to heaven already. You're here, which means you're inherently vulnerable. You're here for a purpose. If you're not dead, you're not done. And if you're resisting vulnerability, you're resisting Jesus himself. I had a little experience of vulnerability this past summer when I went with some friends. We did this hiking thing a few years ago, I went back there, and one of the guys said, "Hey, we're also going to do this rock climber rappelling thing." I'm like, "Sure, I'll go do that." Actually, no, he said I was going to do it, so I went in to do it. And we get there, and we see the big rock face. It's about 100 feet. And he said, "Mark, why don't you start with the rappelling thing?" And like I got like really scared. Like my heart went, it just like it just started feeling weird. My heart felt really, really weird. Because I don't say I'm afraid of heights, I just don't like them, okay? But I don't want to be afraid of them, but I'll climb up that ladder to do what needs to get done. But the way the whole rappelling thing worked is that they just gave me a rope and they tied it around me and they said, just walk backwards off the cliff. And so just kind of like keep moving your feet backwards. And what would end up happening is that, I'd walk backwards, and then eventually I would be walking down the side of the wall, the cliff, the 100-foot cliff. And it didn't feel good at all because it was me and that rope. And I knew I could trust the rope. I mean, it was a big rope, and people do this all the time. But I still had to back off the cliff. I still had to lean over and put all my weight back over a cliff that was 100 feet down. I had a guy that helped me along, though. I told him, I was like, just so you know, I'm the biggest wuss. You need to, and so, just talk to me like the biggest wimp, all right? You'd walk me through it. And he did, and he walked me through it, and sure enough, I walked down, I loved it, and I did it 4 more times, right? But vulnerability feels bad. But it's the heart of your identity in Christ. If God's purpose was for you to not feel vulnerable and to only feel safety, you would be in heaven now. In the meantime, you're here called to love this world. And love is inherently vulnerable. Love always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Those are all vulnerable words. Jesus went ahead of us, though. We bear no vulnerability that he doesn't feel. He's vulnerable in that he gave his mission to us. And, to different degrees, we get it right and we don't get it right, and he's okay with that because he's still with us. He's the one who holds that rope. And there's no vulnerability that we will face that he will allow us. He's not going to allow us to crash on the rocks. We might go slowly over that cliff, and we may get stuck on the cliff, but he will never let go of the rope. He carries it for us. You may remember Esther. Esther was in this very secular world, and she was the only Jew in the harem of the king. And the king got twisted into this thing where he's going to destroy all the Jews. And it was put to her to go speak up for the Jews. She's like, hey, that's not my thing. You don't realize how vulnerable you are when you go before the king. And her uncle Mordecai came back to her and said this, go ahead, Esther, you can remain silent at this time, but just know this, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. Who knows what's going to happen to you and your family if you try to play it safe. But just know this, it might be that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. And Jesus comes to all of us and says, look, I'm holding the rope. I have placed you in a position. The church is going to be fine. The kingdom of God is going to be fine. Jesus holds the rope. He is going to be fine. But who knows to what relationship, to what friendship, to what moment he has called you for such a time as this. Let's pray.